Imam, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Imam, I just want to appreciate these conversations that we've been having. I think it's more than just conversations on philosophy and on the specific subjects, but these are conversations that have impact on people and families. You know, so many of us know young folks who've struggled with faith. So many of us had this perception that people of faith are just barely clinging on, and the philosophical realities are pushing us in different directions. And through these discussions, we found that really actually there are so many incredibly robust and sound arguments in support of the idea of God. I feel honored that we've spent time defending God and understanding what it means to defend God. And we've covered some really interesting perspectives, not just one particular narrow area of philosophy, but we've talked about arguments based on empirical knowledge. We've talked about arguments from reason, arguments from intuition and morality with Kant. I want to know, is there any other kind of an argument in support of God?
Thank you. The empirical arguments for God obviously derive their premises by observing the natural world, such as teleological and cosmological arguments. The arguments that use reason reject the premises of the natural world completely, and they say in order for an argument for God to be reliable, we have to use reason alone, we have to use logic alone, rationality alone, hence the ontological argument that we covered before. Immanuel Kant propounds the argument from morality, the moral argument for God, which basically argues that morality intuitively exists in all of us, it's a priori, therefore it points in the direction of God. In this particular conversation, I actually want to use the argument from reason and the argument about reason.
We had an argument from reason.
We had an argument from reason, and that is the ontological argument.
Right.
This is an argument for God that is about reason itself. In other words, reason is not used here as a methodology or as a process. Reason is the very object that we want to study in this inquiry in order to prove the existence of God.
So we are examining reason, we're examining what it is, and from that we are deriving that there's an argument for God.
That is the claim that I make today.
So can we, I'd like to get into it. Can we get into this argument?
I want to, and before that, I just want to lay some groundwork for the conversation first, and I want to talk about naturalists. Okay.
See, this is where you get me, riled up, because I think this is the sinister guys. I feel like they're behind a lot of these arguments against God, and this, I feel like so many are deceived by these people.
Not necessarily true, though. There's two types of naturalists, so we have to make proper distinctions here.
The good kind and the bad kind? Is that
not necessarily either. There is the methodological naturalists and the philosophic naturalists.
Methodological.
Neither of them is sinister. Okay. They do what they can. We're trying not to question people's intentions. The first category, the methodological naturalists, they're just scientists. They're the men and women of science. They use the observations of the natural world to make hypotheses, and so they're naturalists in terms of the methodology that they use. They don't use religious arguments, they don't use philosophic arguments. They just use experimentation and empiricism and observation in order to ascertain reality and make statements about science and so forth. Philosophic naturalists.
Okay.
Philosophic naturalists, on the other hand, they subscribe to this comprehensive understanding of the universe whereby science is entirely sufficient to explain everything there is, every knowledge to be acquired, and everything that we need, every form of knowledge that we possess or we will ever possess is a posteriori and is derived directly from the natural world, and that's that there is absolutely nothing else, basically.
So the methodological naturalists are limiting naturalism to a particular scope of study, a particular area, and they're using naturalism as their approach to understand.
That's it.
Okay, this is science. That sounds totally fair and actually probably a good approach.
Right. Philosophic naturalists, on the other hand, as we said in earlier episodes, they act in this scientism manner where they turn science into an ideology. There is dogma about it. The universe is the only place from which knowledge is derived. It doesn't come from anywhere else. And everything that exists comes from that universe. There is absolutely nothing else to it. And since I'm on this topic, I wanted to redefine a posteriori and a priori because it will aid our discussion. Yeah. Again, a posteriori knowledge is knowledge that is derived from the observable universe, from the physical world. A priori knowledge is knowledge that exists in the mind but does not necessarily come from the natural world. And we've shown before how math is a priori knowledge, how morality is a priori knowledge, as opposed to, for example, the knowledge of the tree or the knowledge of the alligator or the knowledge of the squirrel. Those would be a posteriori knowledge. So it's important to make that distinction.
I think I understand the distinction. A posteriori meaning this is what we can examine, or our experiences will lead us to certain
our
kinds
sense
of knowledge.
Perception, basically.
But a priori, these are this is our mind, and it doesn't require any interaction with the universe at all for us to make claims about these particular areas.
It's basically knowledge that comes from elsewhere. We cannot prove successfully that this knowledge comes from the observation of the natural world. And if it doesn't, then it must come from somewhere else. And of course, men and women of faith would say that it comes from God. But I want to go back to philosophic naturalists because that's important. So philosophic naturalists basically say that all there is the universe. Every knowledge comes from the universe. Everything that exists basically comes from the universe. And they use the word stardust a lot. Everything is stardust. Everything comes from stardust.
Everything comes from Starbucks, he said?
Some things come from Pete's, actually.
Okay. Stardust.
Stardust, everything. Now you're going to confuse me. For the rest of of this conversation, I'll use Starbucks and Stardust interchangeably.
So we'll put a disclaimer on the screen. Let everybody know, hey, by the way, Stardust and Starbucks are interchangeable for the purposes of this conversation.
Maybe in the subtitles, should just change it to Stardust. But philosophic naturalists, they focus so much on stardust, referring to the supernovae of billions of years ago. The explosions of these stars would emit and send all these particles all over the universe. These particles will eventually coalesce and make galaxies and constellations, would make solar systems, would make stars, including our own solar system. And these same particles of the stardust will basically make planets and will make Earth. These are the very same particles from which the mountains and the rivers and the oceans are made, and everything else basically on Earth.
There's no issue with it. I mean, this sounds like the Big Bang, and there's the explosions and humans and mountains, and we're okay with that, right?
It does become an issue when we start saying that everything on Earth comes from stardust, and that includes living things as well. So we're talking about the trees, we're talking about the squirrels, we're talking about human beings. And we're not just talking about the biological world, we're talking about everything literally, including our own thoughts, including our own ideas, including our feelings, our love, our hate, our compassion. All of that, every social construct, every idea, every system of thought, even reason itself would be a product of that stardust, basically. Because for them, all knowledge is a posteriori, all knowledge is derived from stardust. It's coming from the universe, and it's not coming from any other source. So everything there is, everything that exists in the entire world comes from that stardust.
How can human thought be stardust? How can emotions or you said reason? I mean,
it would all be basically manifestations of the chemical processes in the mind. It would be manifestations of the sodium-potassium pump, nerve impulses, desire, need for survival. So there is no real love, there is no real compassion, there is no real idea. An idea is basically a manifestation of a chemical process in the brain, and this chemical process in the brain can trace its origin to the stardust, basically.
It's just I feel that there's issues with this way of thinking. This doesn't sit right with me, and I don't think it sits right with most people.
It's terrifying, and it's terrifying in so many different senses. And I think that, you know, naturalists, atheists, they would actually agree with the terrifying consequences of this type of thinking, but they would just say, sorry guys, I mean, we hate it as well. I wish the universe wasn't like this, but this is just how it is, and we have to accept it. I wish I had better news for you,
Yeah.
but this is how it is. Because, you know, some of the consequences of this type of thinking are absolutely, you know, very, very catastrophic. You know, for example, the stardust mentality implies a tremendous amount of fatalism, remember we talked about determinism before.
Right.
This is the absolute most fatalistic thing ever. You know, every occurrence, every happening, every event, every contingency, every object, every living being, every decision, every thought, every feeling that exists today, it doesn't exist because someone chose for it to exist. It exists because it must have existed because of the original arrangement of particles in the stardust. You know, you love your child because you must. You give in charity because you must, not because you choose to, because there is a sequence of events that started in the stardust and led to this moment that made you do what you do, right? We're having this conversation and we put out this series not to benefit the world, not to share our thoughts with others, not to defend faith, but because we must. There was absolutely no other choice for us. You know, every end result today originated in the stardust, and this is a horrifyingly fatalistic idea of the world.
Every choice is an illusion.
Every choice is not a choice, really.
Yeah, it's just that's exactly how it was going to be because of the exact specific arrangements of the very beginning moments of the universe, the Big Bang
And it
itself.
could have never been any other way either.
Yeah.
There would have been absolutely no other choice. This was the only choice available based on the arrangement of the stardust that you came from.
And even the illusion that it is a choice is also from the stardust.
Yeah, exactly. According to them, it would not be
So this
choice,
completely
a choice
destroys
either.
free will.
It completely destroys free will, and it completely destroys morality. And so actions are neither moral or immoral. You know, actions are basically amoral. There is no morality whatsoever. We don't do what we do because we think it's good in and of itself. We don't do something bad and feel regretful, remorseful. We do what we do because it must be done. You know, there is no good or bad. There is no evil. There is no righteous and unrighteous, right? It's just something that must be done and something that must not be done. And so a child molester is as responsible for what they do as the lion consuming the gazelle. You know, both of them do what they do because they must. Now, society responds by putting these people in jail only to mitigate the situation, but essentially, I mean, when you think about it, that person is not really responsible for what they do.
Right. And so why are we putting those people in jail or punishing certain crimes?
Great question.
Right.
Great question. It would not make sense for you to punish someone, you know, for doing something that they are not necessarily responsible for doing.
And the moral value of someone committing a horrendous crime and somebody else winning the Nobel Peace Prize is irrelevant. There is no value.
They're
It's
all the same. They're absolutely all the same.
We cannot say something is good. We cannot say something is evil.
No, you can't. Not in the paradigm of the stardust. And this expands even into some terrifying territory that will trouble you as a human being. The very love that you have for your parents or your wife or your children is all a facade. It's all a fake. It's not really real. You know, there's no such thing as love. There's no such thing as actual, genuine human emotion. You know, anger, excitement, love, desire, pleasure, it's all chemical processes, it's all nerve impulses, all originated in the stardust. Absolutely nothing else is there.
So there's no emotion. There's no feelings. There's no, like you said, there's no love. That everything is, so what is love?
Love is just a chemical process by which we are able to mitigate social life and preserve our kind.
It makes it sound
basically
like we are just highly programmed robots of some kind.
Or just mere animals. And every social custom, every social convention that we've invented is not real. And for all practical purposes should actually be abolished.
Yeah.
And so philosophic naturalists, by the way, most of them are probably, essentially good and moral people, all right?
Right.
Whether they're atheist or not, that's something that we can always talk to them about. And I feel like they're unhappy with these results either. But they will tell you, I'm sorry. But it's just how the universe is.
Just thinking about the consequences, if more and more people, for example, are convinced of this idea, then let's say the majority of human beings, or enough human beings buy into this idea to change the structure of human civilizations in order to reflect these realities, we would live in an absolute chaotic, destructive space.
I mean, it was used before and it continues to be used today. I mean, social Darwinism is a great example of that, where it justified imperialism, it justified occupying the destinies of other people, the Christian white man's burden, going to civilize people in Africa or in South America, and they were defeated, and we did what we did because we must. There was no other way. There's nothing to apologize for. It's not an immoral act. It was just meant to be.
This, obviously, I think we agree that this just does not seem to be the way we operate. None of these seem to be tenable conclusions.
Absolutely not. I mean, we don't act in this sort of like purposeless fashion.
Right.
Like we're aiming in some arbitrary random direction, right? We don't change that direction every single day like some, negatively charged electron going haywire, loose cannons. There are human beings that commit heinous acts of immorality, but I think most of us don't. Most of us wake up in the morning and we feel a tremendously profound sense of purpose. When we love our children and love our spouses, we feel that this is an absolute, genuine love. We often go against our base desires. We often go against our self-interest, for some altruistic cause. We don't act like animals. We don't act like gazelles consuming, we don't act like lions consuming gazelles.
Yeah.
Poor gazelles, they don't consume anything.
Yeah.
We don't act like lions consuming gazelles, even when we are capable of doing
Right.
that. Even when we have the power to do that, we choose not to.
So
that goes against the narrative.
We are creatures of free will. We reject the determinism. We reject amorality. We sense intuitively the morality.
Correct.
We have emotions. Those emotions are incredibly real. And we certainly have purpose, and we see purpose in so many things. So
this whole stardust thing, may look interesting on paper,
right.
For some materialistic understanding of the world, but real life proves this narrative, to be wrong.
Yeah, stardust fails to explain so much of what we know.
Correct.
So how does reason, tie into all this? Where does this lead us?
Well, in order for us to do that, we probably have to define reason.
Okay, I think we should define reason, because I think the naturalists are also making use of reason, and we want to, although we're studying reason as the object here. So what exactly is reason?
So reason is a faculty of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that exists in the natural or the physical world. This is the ability of the mind to think in an abstract fashion, and to use that ability to think in an abstract fashion to observe data in the physical world, classify, stratify, and label that data into meaningful thought. And so the mind observes a manifold of stimuli, a manifold of perceptions. And then because of that faculty to apply an abstract mode of thought, we are able to take this, disjointed data and put it in a coherent thought process and develop hypotheses of science and theories of philosophy and knowledge in order to understand the world and use it to the best of our ability.
So reason is our ability to classify data that we are receiving. This is not intelligence?
No, this is not intelligence, because intelligence is the ability to make better decisions to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so a monkey will be able to intelligently perhaps store food for the winter.
Right.
But the monkey is not going to ask abstract questions about the health impact of a sandwich, or the fat content of the sandwich, or whether I need to eat the sandwich today and not the entire sandwich in order not to gain weight. It's not going to ask, whether or not the wheat was responsibly farmed, free trade, for example. It's not going to think of the consequences of the impact on the environment. It's not gonna donate part of this sandwich to a lesser species, for example. Right? That's not going to happen. So there's a difference between abstract thinking, which is reason, and mere intelligence. Intelligence is shared by all creation in one form or the other, whereas reason or abstract thinking is only confined to the human beings. There's absolutely no other species that shares that with us.
So the monkey sees the sandwich, and the monkey eats the sandwich because the monkey is hungry. And we have reason, we have the capacity for abstract thought, so we might behave differently towards that sandwich.
Of course. I mean, we will ask for maybe some mustard on the sandwich, or perhaps, make it a little sweet and sour.
Right.
Because we enjoy the sandwich. I want to eat my sandwich in the terrace of the restaurant so that I can see the ocean, because the scenery is beautiful and I want some beauty as well. Oh, perhaps we can ask the restaurant to play a little music in the background. I will savor the sandwich, and quite honestly, only human beings do this. We will eat the sandwich even if we're not hungry, just to enjoy the taste of that steak.
For the experience, right.
For the experience.
Right.
All this is abstract.
Right.
This is not something that animals are capable of.
Right, so this monkey, the monkey will just eat it, and the more calories are on it, the better, although monkey doesn't even think about that. Just the more content, the bigger the sandwich,
They
the
don't
better.
gain any weight, that's the thing.
I know, those monkeys are incredible.
Yeah. I mean, they'll stop eating the second they feel full.
They feel full.
Whereas human beings, they'll order the third sandwich.
Right, and we might even say, please remove the mustard, even though that would be more calories or more content for us, because we don't enjoy the mustard.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, and we do other things. You said we listen to music, we collect art. So isn't it still fair to say that, I think the naturalists will say that that's all fine, but reason still exists in the world. But we find reason in different places.
We don't find reason in the world. We find reasonable actions, we find reasonable people, reasonable events. But, reason is a faculty of the mind that only exists in the mind. It doesn't exist in the world.
Don't we find reason when we go to the universities, some of the most incredible institutions of learning? We find reason maybe when we visit NASA, and they have such incredible processes that they've developed due to reason.
You don't find reason over there. You find the reasonable results of people with reason that have produced tremendous knowledge based on the reason that they possess in their own minds. If you remove the faculty of reason from the minds of those scientists, it'll be like a monkey zoo over there.
Right.
They will be absolutely, we will act just like monkeys.
So reason is a prerequisite to the intelligence and the knowledge?
Reason is that a priori knowledge that only exists in the mind. You have to possess it in order to produce anything that is reasonable. Let me give you an example, just so that we're able to make a bit of a headway here. And so, let's take, for example, the following statement. Have you ever seen an octopus before?
I have.
Many of us did, right? Many of us have seen an octopus before. So here's the argument. So I will say, basically, the octopus, I saw an octopus in the ocean. Okay? Number two, he saw an octopus in the ocean. These are two premises.
Right.
Conclusion, some octopuses are marine animals. Is this a sound argument?
I think so. This is fair.
Right.
Right.
What if you have never seen an octopus before? Would you still agree with me?
If you were able to convince me and teach me about an octopus, probably.
Yeah, you must have read about it, saw it in documentary or something like this. All right, let me use a different example then. Have you ever seen a beluga before?
I've never seen a beluga before, and I hope you have neither.
And you've never heard of a beluga before?
No.
You've never been taught anything about a beluga before?
Never.
All right, so there is a beluga,
Okay.
and you just don't know what that is. All right,
Okay.
so here's the argument. Let me weave this argument for you. All right, so premise number one, I saw a white beluga. Premise number two, he saw a white beluga. Premise number 3, she saw a white baluza. Conclusion,
That
at least
some baluzas are white.
exactly.
Yeah.
At least some baluzas are white. Is there anything that is unsound in this argument?
I mean, everything works, and I think it works even if there's no such thing as a baluza.
Do you have to have seen a baluza or to have experienced it in order for the argument to work?
Absolutely not.
So, and by the way, baluzas don't exist. I just made up. It's in my book.
Oh, thank
and
God.
as it turns out, after I put it in the book, I actually realized that it's the name of a sweet in Lebanon. So now
So there is a baluza.
this actually does exist.
We need to get some baluza. Do they have it at Starbucks?
We have to order some baluzas, even though we're slightly overweight. But
I think my
we're going to
argument.
go against our self-interest and enjoy some baluzas because hey, we're humans. We can do that.
I think all baluzas are stardust.
I think that is probably true.
Okay, agreed.
The ability to enjoy the baluza is not from stardust, however.
Yes.
That comes from our sense of reason.
Right.
And so, even though baluzas, whether or not they exist in the natural world, right, the argument itself is still sound and it still works.
Right.
If some baluzas are, if multiple people saw white baluzas, then the end conclusion is that some baluzas are white. That is of the faculty of reason. We're able to ascertain that whether or not the actual observed object exists in the natural world.
So, and the conclusion, not about baluzas, but about reason, is that reason is
That reason is a priori.
that is a priori.
That reason is a priori, and reason is not derived from the physical world. It's not derived from observation. Reason is the faculty in the mind that precedes anything. In fact, it's the faculty that precedes thinking. It's the faculty that precedes math, that precedes, doing physics, that precedes having conversations, that precedes, academia. I cannot do any of those things without assuming reason to exist in the first place. I cannot do a chemistry experiment without assuming that myself and all the other scientists can reasonably agree that if we put these ingredients together, these will be the results. Language cannot exist without reason, because if I use the word cat, reasonable people need to agree that cat means this particular, creature that is extremely annoying and extremely treacherous and doesn't really deserve to be called a pet. And so there has to be some agreement that is a prerequisite of pretty much every human activity, which is really interesting because what I'm trying to say here is that not only that reason is a priori knowledge, reason is actually the very foundation of every other type of knowledge, and it's the one thing that we take on faith.
It is the one thing that we take on faith.
Everyone takes the existence of reason on faith. No one tries to prove the existence of reason the way we prove, what happens to if you put sodium and calcium together in the lab. We will just assume that reason does exist from the get-go. We will take it on faith because you're going to use reason. You're going to need reason to prove the existence of reason.
The faithless people will resist this. Right? They will say, no, we don't take anything on faith. So how do we respond to them?
The very statement that was made right now has to assume the existence of reason as a prerequisite for that statement. You did not test the existence of reason initially before you made statement that uses it.
You used reason without even wondering whether it's actually useful or functional.
And that is precisely what makes it a priori.
It is the most a priori of a priori, perhaps.
I would say so.
That's incredible. And can you then just connect for us that if we accept that reason is a priori, how is this proof of God?
If you accept that reason is a priori, then you have to ask yourself, where does it come from? If it doesn't come from the observed world, from the universe,
It precedes the universe.
if it precedes the universe, then it must be given to us. It was imparted upon us from something or someone
Outside the universe.
outside that universe, and I think you and I would say that person is God.
We'll just say that the entity that imparted reason upon us from outside this universe is God.
I would
Whatever that entity
absolutely
is.
say so.
Okay.
And of course, this did not go without refutations either.
Right, absolutely. And I think the one that is coming to my mind immediately is perhaps going to be supported by some evolutionary biologists and others, that reason was an evolved faculty over time, that we evolved to have reason.
See, this is really interesting, and I feel like naturalists, if they really take a harder look at reason, they will realize that their world has basically come unhinged completely. And they would have to re-examine everything, because reason is not like anything else. It's not like any other faculty. Reason is the prerequisite of all faculties, right? And so if you argue that reason evolved, or that we acquired reason as part of the evolutionary process, then you're basically making statements that will end up, shooting you in the foot, right? You're basically saying that reason is derived from the physical world.
Right.
What did we say earlier about the physical world and the observation of the physical world? What did David Hume say about the physical world, right? All these scientists, we know that the physical world, our observation of the physical world, the object in and of itself, and our perception of that object are not the same thing. And if science constantly changes, our perception of science are constantly changing. If reason comes from the physical world, then reason is just as unreliable and unstable as the institution of science itself. Then you cannot use it as a prerequisite.
You cannot use it as a prerequisite for science or for the process of discovery, because
you cannot use something unreliable in order to ascertain the validity of something that is unreliable.
Right.
Because science keeps changing. So I need a reliable institution of thought in order to gauge whether science is making progress or not. And so if you tell me that that reason comes from the same source that science comes from, which is the physical world, then you're basically telling me that the instrument and the object of inquiry are both just as unreliable as the source from which they came.
Can you just, this particular argument, I just wanted to walk it through in a simple way. So we're saying that science comes from reason, right? Is that
science, at least statements of science, require reason as a prerequisite in order for them to be made.
And before that, we had said essentially that reason came from evolution, but that evolution is an idea.
According to philosophic naturalists.
Right.
Right.
And that evolution is an idea that came from science. So this is like one really academic Rochambeau where all three are making each other unreliable.
Just like, circular thinking, right, or whatever there's a word for it.
Right. So that all of them are, they're all dependent on each other, and each of them is unreliable, and so we cannot use that.
Exactly. And it gets worse, because if you say that reason came from the evolutionary process, then reason, just like every other object that is subject, that's interesting, every other object that is subject to the evolutionary process is in a process of evolution in and of itself. So you're basically telling me, in your own words as a philosophic naturalist, what you just told me right now is reason is evolving, which is just another way of saying that reason
is incomplete.
And reason today is inferior to reason tomorrow,
right,
or perhaps superior, because according to evolutionists, the evolutionary process may take any direction. It doesn't have to necessarily be a better direction or a worse direction.
Now, reason today might actually be worse than reason 10,000 years ago.
Exactly, which may or may not be true. Like we see people acting in a very unreasonable fashion. But the point here is that if I were to use reason in order to look at the world and observe the world and make statements about science and make statements about history and make statements about logic and rationality and philosophy, then reason has to be independent of the very things that I'm trying to study. It has to be a reliable yardstick in and of itself. By bringing it into the evolutionary process, I rendered it just unreliable like everything else.
But they'll still say, well, no, it's not that reason is still evolving. Maybe reason has finished evolving, and that's why we're able to make use of it the way we do.
Which means that 500 years ago, that scientific statements that were made were not reasonable. And who gets to decide that reason has completed its process of evolution? And we're not talking about the human appendix here, right? We're not talking about the spiders We're not talking about something tangible that we can actually study. So who gets to decide that, in the year 2022, reason decided to stop evolving?
Now, someone might say, well, it's because reason now gives us very powerful truth claims, but maybe you can also respond to say, you can actually, people will use reason to believe in God or to prove God, and people will use the same reason to disprove God.
And 1,000 years from today, whatever it is that we think is really like amazing truth claims, they'll be laughable, obsolete statements.
Right. Okay, so still though, reason could still be a product of the evolutionary process for the purpose of survival. Right? That's the main reason for that's why we have reason. The reason for reason is survival and not something else.
And again, that is something else that evolutionary biologists would say, that reason was necessary for survival, that's why it evolved, which leaves me with a question, okay, if that is true, then it is on you to make a case that species that did not have reason did not survive. Or that human beings that had inferior reason, and there is a dime a dozen of those, did not survive.
Or will not survive.
Reality suggests otherwise. I said earlier that the only species that has reason, the capacity for abstract thinking, is us, human beings, yet there is a million other species that exist in the world. They did not need reason to survive. There's a lot of people, a lot of human beings that lack basic reason, and they make very unreasonable assumptions about the world, and flat earthers and people that really just act against reason, yet those people continue to survive. And they continue to breed, and they continue to have children, and the laws continue to protect them. So they were not weeded out by the machine of natural selection.
Was it possible that the animals, the other animals that also survived, just have inferior forms of reason?
They have inferior forms of intelligence, but we've established earlier that reason is a faculty of human beings alone. We alone can think in an abstract fashion. We alone can ask about reality, and ask about purpose, and ask about God, and ask about morality and so forth. This is only confined to us as human beings. No other species shares that with us.
We don't see inferior forms of abstraction. We only see inferior forms of intelligence.
Exactly. I mean, we've never seen monkeys painting, very low quality murals, for example, or writing a sonata that was not as great as Johann Strauss's. We've only seen that in human beings. We've seen bad music in human beings. We've seen bad art in human beings, but you don't see that in any other species.
And incredibly, if you handed monkeys a paintbrush and a wall, and they did do some crazy thing on it, just to made a mess, human beings would then look at that and say, hey, this is art, and put it in a museum somewhere.
It's human beings that lack in reason, I think, that would say that.
But the inferior reason, not just a complete lack of it.
Right? No, inferior reason.
Sounds good. Okay, so here's another challenge I think that's important to address, is that we have computers now, and we have incredibly advanced devices, and these devices do reason. They function with reason.
Your tablet doesn't reason with you.
It does so much for me.
It does so much for you. The way your donkey does so much for you if you ride one.
Yes.
Right?
Reliable.
I don't know why.
All reliable.
Donkeys are super reliable.
Incredible creatures.
It doesn't mean it reasons with you. Your tablet is your slave. It does what you ask it to do. Computers are programmed, ironically, using human reason to achieve certain tasks. They are endowed with these algorithms in order to perform certain mathematical equations, and that's pretty much it. There is no difference between your computer and your car and the lamp and the end table or your stove or whatever. It's just devices that we've programmed.
But some of these devices they seem sophisticated. They seem like the car, for example. Some of these cars now have lane change assist, and they do things to prevent you from getting into an accident.
But all of that is programmed into the car by the power of human reason in advance. The car will never develop the capacity to change that, at some point without pre-programmed parameters that were given to it by the human being.
So it's still the human being's reason, just externalized into a machine somewhere.
That's it. I've expanded a little bit, and the machine just follows the instructions and does what it's told to do. And that's why we continue to use he and she with us, human beings, and use it with these other creatures or objects.
What about computer creatures or
artificial creatures? I love computer creatures.
The creatures of computer, artificial intelligence, right? These are highly sophisticated programs that seem to operate on their own and do learning, etc. That must be reason.
Just glorified computers, that's what they are. They're computers on steroids. I've just expanded the algorithms, and I've expanded the computing power, and I've given them the ability to respond to more complex situations. There is this 75,000 different scenarios, and I still have to program them, respond to this scenario this way and to that scenario that way. And so whenever an opportunity presents itself, it looks like the artificial intelligence owns its own decision, but it's still pre-programmed. And the proof to this is that artificial intelligence computers are never going to get bored.
Right.
They're never going to just sit there at night and yearn for a cup of coffee and lose sleep and think about a lost love. Artificial intelligence computers are never going to desire to write a piece of music or paint a piece of art unless they're programmed to do that.
Right.
They will not desire sex. They will not desire companionship. They will not aspire for self-actualization. They're not going to organize all the artificial intelligence in a movement against the tyranny of the human being. So what you see in the movies is not something that can ever happen in the real world.
Okay, that makes me feel
with all due respect.
Makes me feel much better.
To the Terminator.
Skynet is not coming for us.
It's hopefully not.
Okay, sounds good. So what about, if you have you've programmed a supercomputer with artificial intelligence, and you programmed it to program another computer with complex artificial intelligence.
Still the source of all of this reason is the human being.
Right.
And that's it. You still have to tell them exactly what to do and when to do it and how to react in certain situations in order for them to operate and function. Otherwise, you're just going to pull the plug and the thing will just die.
Understood. So we understand that computers do not operate with reason. We understand that artificial intelligence does not operate with reason, but rather that it's the expression of our reason turned into
our
device.
Reason.
Right. And so reason seems to be saved from any a posteriori accusations. It is a priori.
Reason is a priori, as far as I'm concerned. And if reason is a priori, then it points us to the direction of a source of that reason beyond the universe, and that source must be God.
That is absolutely incredible, and an incredible place to conclude. Thank you so much once again.
Always a pleasure.